Hi there, Terry. This is Fabi, and I'm here to try to answer your question by a little video demonstration of how it is that you can add a tie-in or a tie-off to an object. And this is for a design file that a person has purchased, and where you have actually stitched this design out and you have discovered that the original digitizer neglected to add in adequate tie-ins and tie-offs. And the importance of that is that it's very obvious that once the design has been stitched, it's going to come unraveled, as the stitches are not going to be secured at the beginning and the ends. So unfortunately, one of the only ways that most of us discover that this happens is because we have stitched out a design and we have discovered that that is a problem that has occurred. Now, we're so lucky that we have our digitizing programs because we're able to fix up all manners of designs that have various issues. One of the things that I am going to encourage anyone that's watching this video is that it really is important that you do either one of two things. And the first thing is that you have opened this design in your software program and you have run it through a player or a stitch simulator so that you can watch that design stitching out on the screen. And many times when you do that, you're going to discover some problems that might occur. You might discover that there aren't tie-ins and tie-offs. You might discover that the stitch spacing is awkward. You might, I don't know, there's just a lot of different things that you might discover just by watching the stitch player in your software program. The other thing that I highly recommend, and I honestly have to tell you that I don't always do myself, but I'm always glad when I do it, is that you stitch this out on a sample fabric first. And that is because many times you're going to also learn a lot of different things about the way that design has been stitched out. And if, especially if the item that you're planning to embroider on is something that's irreplaceable or precious or limited in quantity or whatever it might be, you will have averted a possible disaster by doing one or both of those two things, running it through a simulator and or a practice stitch out. What I've got open on my screen right now is a design that I have purchased several collections from this particular digitizer who I won't name, but this company is notorious for leaving out tie-ins and tie-offs. And so I did not investigate this entire little heirloom design to try to find a problem. What I did is I just selected one of these flowers and I duplicated it and I opened it up here in another page. So what I've got right here is that flower, and I have it have the true view, as you saw, turned off on the screen. So prior to doing this, one of the things that if I have discovered that there is a design that has a lot of problems in it, and I really do feel like I like the design enough that I want to take the time and effort to fix the design, the first thing that I will do is I will come up to the software settings tab and I will choose embroidery settings. And from here, this here is your stitch file. This is your JEF format or your PES format or whatever it may be that you purchased. I would select the convert the stitches into object shapes, and then what the software program does is it tries to interpret that stitch file as an original embroidery object file. And therefore, when you do that, you're actually going to have more control over editing a design if it needs a lot of editing. All right, so what you do if you're going to work in this mode is that you would do this first, and then you would open up your design and begin to edit it. Right now, I'm just going to leave it as this leaf stitches because I'm only going to work on this simple little flower and just show you two different things about it. Okay, so I'm not going to change this, and you may need to do that if you've got a lot of work that you need to do on a design. So as I zoom in on here, you're going to recognize that the little circle that's right here on this first petal is where this object design begins. So what I want to do is, first of all, as I said before, I would maybe want to run this through the player and just kind of see how is this design going to stitch out. You know, and we could see when it did that the first stitch was right here, and then it walked up to the end of that petal, as it's doing with all of these petals, and then it's doing these satin stitches back over that run line. And so this particular little flower that I chose wasn't the best example of doing this, but the one thing that I want you to do, maybe I should have slowed it down. So there was no tie-in at the beginning, but there was a very limited tie-off at the end of this. I don't know if you saw that when the design was stitching out. I'm going to just back this off just a little bit. I'm going to slow down the player a bit, and we're going to see how it ended this stitch out. So I'm going to hit the play button again, and it's coming up to the last petal, zoomed in greatly. And when it comes to the tie off, did you see that? It just maybe did about 3 little stitches. So this does have somewhat of a tie off, but you know, if it were my design, I probably would feel more comfortable if it had a little bit more of a tie off at the end. So we'll work on both of those things, tie in and tie off. So this is what you do, is you just hit your home button on your keyboard, and when you do that, the design, if it's not in true view, let's zoom out a little bit, and I hit the home button. Oh, I need to escape out of this player, excuse me. Here we go, escape. This will let me get out of here. Sometimes this silly software doesn't do what I want it to do. Here we go. Now we're back where I want to say. Sorry about that. You never know what you're going to come up against when you're making a video. So I'm going to hit the home button. My design turns black, which means that I'm at the beginning of the design because none of these stitches have yet been stitched. And what I'm going to do is right at the beginning of this, I'm going to just digitize in here a little, somewhat of a star kind of a shape. It's just a way to add in some stitches where they're sort of crisscrossing over each other a little bit, which helps to make them a little bit more secure. I'm also going to do this in an area that's within this boundary. I don't want it to extend out beyond the petals, obviously, right? So I will choose my digitize open line, and under the line effects, I'm just going to make sure I have my single run selected. And what I want to do is I'm going to digitize just by clicking, not super big, but you know, maybe 5 or so stitch points. And I'm going to end this stitch point right at the beginning of that object, right in the center of that circle, which is the tie-in. And I will select my enter button, and you will see over on my resequence bar that I've got this little star tie-in right in front of my flower design. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my arrow buttons on my keyboard, and you're going to see that then the design continues to stitch out. So I'm basically doing a little manual way of walking through the design. So I'm doing this because let's just say, for example, that you have discovered another spot in the same object that also might need a little bit more securing. You can just walk through the design by doing that exact same process that I just did. And when your maze box is at the point where you need to add in some more extra stitches for securing, you would just pause right here, come back to your digitize open line, single run, and add in, you know, whatever you might think you might need at that point, and then end it at exactly that same spot. Okay, so that's what we call seeding a design. Seeding, like in planting a seed. So let's hit our end button so that we're now at the end of the design. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add in a couple of extra stitches here. This time I'm going to make sure my digitize open line is again selected with the single run function. This time I'm going to start right at the end of that, in the middle of this maze box. And I'm just going to add in a couple of little extra tie-ins because I didn't think that what we had there was adequate. And I could end this one wherever I want. I think I'll go ahead and end it right where it began, right inside the maze box. Hit your enter button, and there you have a little tie-off at the end of your flower, or your letter, or your whatever part of the design that you are working on. So what you need to do at this point is just go ahead and save your design. You might want to run the player on it again just to watch it stitch out. And I think I'll zoom out a little bit so it's not jumping so much. Watch it stitch out. See if you like the way that you added in your tie-ins and your tie-offs. And then if you do, you are ready to go ahead and save this design. And I would go ahead and just save it as your stitch format because there's no real need to save this as an EMB or a JAN or whatever format your software program is using. And the reason why I say that is because all we've added in is those little bit of tie-offs. If you don't like them, you know what you could do, you could open up this file again as the original one, and you could just play with it a little bit more to improve upon it. So I hope that that has answered your question adequately. That is how you can manually add in a tie-in and a tie-off to a stitch file. And again, we're using the MBX version 5 program. It would be identical in Hatch 2 and more than likely in MBX version 5.5. If you have any more questions about this process, feel free to ask, and hopefully we can clarify some more if needed. Thanks for watching.